this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. It's autumnal with falling leaves and a little bit of drizzle here on the banks of the Potomac. But we are living through a day very damaging to the fortunes of Trump and his reactionary Republican and worse gang. And this has got two sides to it. Principally, of course, it is the continuing collapse of the Trump bubble. Trump built his political house on stock jobbing and gloating about new highs of the stock market. He is now confronted with the opposite. He's confronted with a time of falling prices on the stock market. We'll survey some of the damage, both through real economy and technically, because of the short-run considerations here that we have to look at, right? Got about 10 days left until the all-important election. So this is ominous in the extreme for Trump. And even some of the mass media have noted, here's the Washington Post, the market slide dents the president's message. Economy that Trump touted shows strain as the gains of 2018 vanish. So Trump might have been claiming, I've kept the bubble going for 2 years. Well, sorry, it's still 2018. You spoke too soon. All the gains, all the speculative bubble racked up in 2018 is now gone. And it's going to dig deep into the other gains. Plunge protection team obviously in overdrive. You might be interested in that, right? You libertarians out there, that's drugged markets, right? That's not a free market. That's the plunge protection team. They use money from the Federal Reserve to prop up key stocks and to save the speculators. Somehow the libertarians don't seem to be too worked up about that one. But in any case, we now have a continuing mudslide. It's not all at once. It's a cumulative process. It's like one of those mudslides, right? After weeks of rain, the mud comes down the hill and washes away the houses, and it comes down the residential streets and sweeps everything away. That's pretty much what we have right now. As of this Friday, well, here we are a little bit after 3 on Friday afternoon. Of course, we're waiting for the close at 4. We'll have a little theory about that we'll tell you about. But the market was down about 340 points earlier today, and it had then recovered down to about minus 100, and now it has gone back to minus 400. It looks like a rather large sell program went through at about 3 p.m., so that is the story there on the stock market. We cite this also because, of course, from the point of view of psychology, mass psychology and politics, the stock market is what counts. There are bond guys who don't pay any attention to the stock market, but of course that's not the average person. If they have money in a 401k, that's probably in mutual funds, and you can take it from there. But the rest of this stuff is looking very grim for the Republicans, right? Trump is not going to be able to repeat his mantra about new highs in the stock market and so forth. He's going to have to become the recession president, the bear market president. You know what they say? One of the proverbs from Wall Street is, genius is a rising market. And if you could call yourself a very stable genius, maybe one of the components that went into that gloating was a rising market. Let's see how well your genius fares in a falling market, Don. you won't like it. And that will be bad for the Republicans. And that's just in time to save this country from an authoritarian and quite possibly totalitarian regime. In other words, this stock market event with probable then reflections and consequences in the real economy, and actually set up by an actual slowdown in the real economy. We'll talk about that. This is tending to quite possibly break up, to disaggregate the attempts by the Republicans to set up this permanent austerity dictatorship. So we got this going on, and the PPT, of course, is at work. It's now down 300 when it was down 400 just a few minutes ago, right? And on what news? On basically none. Just the PPT and the tides of the cell programs. It's the cell programs fighting the PPT, with the cell programs likely to win out. So we got about another half hour before the market closes. Now, the other thing is, of course, the bombs, right? I think you know the story of these bombs. They are explosive devices, I guess. It is not exactly clear how they were supposed to detonate. Were they designed to detonate upon being unwrapped? Was there a timer? Was there some other kind of detonation mechanism? Maybe there was no detonation mechanism at all. But, of course, with these things, the effect of sending the device and having it discovered is also quite serious. So it looks like about a dozen of them were sent, and I think as of today, we've now got Senator Cory Booker was the recipient or the addressee of one of these, and also Clapper, the former director of national intelligence. He works for CNN. We know Brennan had been an addressee, works for CNN. And then, of course, Obama, the Obamas, the Clintons, Holder, and Robert De Niro, the actor, his restaurant, and so forth, right? I think the names of the people slated to get them. This is well known. The eerie thing for Trump, of course, is that the list of addressees corresponds to the Trump enemies list. That's, I guess, embarrassing, right? That's going to cause him some embarrassment. Indeed, he's already claiming that the demagogic momentum of the Republicans, if there ever was such a thing, has been dissipated and broken by these so-called bombs. And he's whining, of course. He's the victim. He's sorry for himself, as he always is, concerned with himself, and therefore not a happy camper. But now, here's the thing. The suspect, and don't ask me how this happened, right? This stuff is all happening in the last hour or so. Let me just read you a description from the New York Post. The New York Post is as reactionary as they come. That's that guy, Kristol, right? I'm sorry, Podhoretz. I had the wrong neocon nepotist. But Podhoretz is the dominant personality. Anyway, in the New York Post, what do we read? Alleged mail bomber apparently turned van into Trump shrine. Trump shrine? Well, we have the pictures. It is interesting. If you look at this New York Post article, you will see the van with all of the windows, I guess except the front, plastered with pro-Trump posters and other items, bric-a-brac. And the FBI is hurrying to put a tarp over it, to put a blue sheet over it so you can't see it, because it's embarrassing, isn't it? The Republicans find it embarrassing, and the FBI covers for the Republicans. Back in a minute. This is Webster Tarpley. We're broadcasting on the afternoon of Friday, October 26th from Washington, D.C. The key stories are two. One is the bombings, and now the alleged bomber Cesar Altieri Sayok, apparently mentally deranged convict with a criminal record, but a paranoid ideologue, no doubt, caught in the snowbanks of paranoia. And then on the other side, the stock market, maybe some of these brokers have gone home, these bums. The Dow is now down about 290 with about half an hour, just a little bit less than half an hour to go. And we'll pay attention to that here in a minute. But now, we're not going to do the whole discussion of who got these bombs. They were all leading Democrats. And, of course, if this was really done by one person, we don't know. Very early days, right? Part of these things is you can't really tell what happened until a little bit of time goes by, right? It's not easy to figure some of these things out, although this one is getting to be pretty clear, pretty fast. So Sayok, here's what the New York Post, a reactionary newspaper, pro-Republican, pro-Trump. So a white van linked to Sayok was turned into a virtual shrine to President Trump, complete with stickers of the commander-in-chief and anti-press, anti-media messages that say, dishonest media, all caps, and CNN sucks, all caps. Sayok was a big detractor of Trump's opponents, including Hillary Clinton, Michael Moore, the Green Party. Sayok, you must be crazy. Without Jill Stein, Trump would not be in the White House. Jill Stein put him in the White House. Go and calculate the Green Party votes in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. You'll see that they're much more than the miserable 77,000 votes by which Trump won those states. But he's got an entire front passenger side window with a screed about job creation. Yeah, this is funny because it shows this is just a parody of Fox News. 28,000 new jobs in February alone. Obama destroyed lots of jobs, lost 286,000 jobs. Well, again, in the real world over here, for how many months Trump has been in office, Obama is ahead of him. The last 20 months of Obama, whatever it is, are more jobs created than under Trump. And then it goes, Sayok puts on his window, zero tolerance, kill your enemy and those who rob you, then take them to Everglades for gators. ISIS hunting permit is on the back. This is on the back. Giant round photo of a smiling Trump. It shows Trump riding a military tank. We'll get to this in a minute. And he's an opponent. He does not like free Medicare, free retirement, and free infrastructure. It's time to tackle illegal immigration, says Cesar Altieri Sayok. Maybe he's a confused person. So let's drill down a little bit here. As we said on the back, Donald Trump, President 2016, ISIS hunting permit, a whole bunch of other stuff, telling you how great North Carolina is. Not particularly clear why. But then on the sides, we have a heroic picture of Mike Pence with 2 thumbs up. We have a picture of Trump with 1 thumbs up. Native Americans for Trump. Then we have another heroic picture of Pence. Then we have Trump in the victorious pose. Top youth soccer recruits for Trump. Seminole Hard Rock Weekly. The Swamp. We see a depiction of all the main Democratic personalities up to their necks in the Washington Swamp. It's not the painting that you may be thinking of, but it's similar. Then we have Liberal Meltdown. We have a whole bunch of Democratic Party figures with crosshairs on them. Hillary in the crosshairs. Van Jones in the crosshairs. Jill Stein, I don't know what you're thinking, but she's in the crosshairs. Then we've got Michael Moore in the crosshairs. Obama as a toddler on a tricycle in the crosshairs, I think. And then the tank. This is now a super tank, right? This is Super Panzer, right? This is huge. This is bigger than a Tiger tank. This is, there was one German tank which was just enormous, right? It looks sort of like that. And it says Trump on the front, Trump on the side, American flag, fireworks going off, and Trump, of course, in a heroic pose on the tank. Kind of reminds you of Yeltsin back in Moscow in 1991 during the coup when he jumped on the tank. Then on the side, it's a little bit harder to read this. My president, they said he had no path to a victory, and it turned into not a landslide, but 306 electoral votes, a tsunami. That's crazy. Bush the elder was like 450 or 470. You are incapable of counting. Then on the side, we've got a bunch of smaller things that we can't really interpret too well from here. But on the bottom of that, I am Donald Trump and I approve this message. And the Democratic Liberal Party has, the idea is it's been taken over by Harvey Weinstein. Now, we don't know what this person is, right? Is he a mythomaniac? Is he somebody who does crazy things to get attention? Is he an ideologue? Is he similar to the paranoid person who walked into the ping pong pizza parlor here in Bethesda, I guess it was, or in the district, and opened fire because there was supposedly a pedophile ring holding little children in captivity in the basement of the building. The problem being that there is no basement that we've been able to discover in that building, and so forth. So this, it kind of takes this whole world of paranoid fanatics and, it puts them on display at a time when this is not good for the fortunes of the Republican Party. Now, of course, the immediate Pavlovian response of the parents themselves is that this is a false flag. Unfortunately, boys, with the false flag, you are now like the boy who cried wolf. For years, for anything that happens, you yell false flags. You're going to yell that about this. Well, what else is new? That's your stock response. Gets you nowhere. Back in a minute on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Once again, it's the Friday before the Friday, and then there's the election. So we got 2 weekends. Now, the other side of things is the question of the stock market. And as we've mentioned here, the plunge protection team is working overtime. You saw those FBI agents pulling the canvas over Sayok's van to hide all of those pro-Trump signs. Oh, my goodness. They didn't want you to see those. What that proves, by the way, dear friends, is the FBI supports Trump. The FBI announced through Comey a probe of Hillary. They had a probe of Trump going on. They didn't tell you anything about that. And indeed, we've now got this article, right? The Dexter Filkins article from the New Yorker of several weeks ago that shows you the story of how various internet watchdogs and sleuths had figured out that there was communication between a Trump organization server in the Midwest and, on the one hand, and Alpha Bank in Russia on the other. And that was worth a story, according to Eric Lichtblau of the New York Times. But the FBI intervened. The FBI rushed in to say, no, New York Times, no, don't publish anything about Trump's server talking to this server in Moscow. And even though the FBI had been investigating, they said, please don't tell the world that we of the FBI had been investigating, right? This is exactly the point. And with that, the Eric Lichtblau article turned into its opposite. Instead of an article that said Trump is being investigated by the FBI for collusion with Russia, it turned into an article saying the FBI assures the New York Times that there's no connection between Trump and Russia. Get the point? The FBI supports Trump. And all of the hue and cry and the Sturm und Drang of the Republicans, right? Nunes and so forth, they're all saying, oh, the FBI struck Page, McCabe, Comey, on and on, right? Legions of rotten apples in the FBI. That's a cover story. If any of those people had wanted to sink Trump, they could have done it with a phone call. The FBI is probing Trump for links to Russia. That would have neatly counterbalanced the torpedo sent by Comey against Hillary. So why is the FBI throwing this tarp, this canvas? Stay away from this tarp, but a canvas. Yes, why are they throwing a canvas over this van, allegedly Sayocs van? No, because it's just so embarrassing, isn't it? It's just excruciatingly embarrassing. So again, the entire story of this will be told, but right now it is what it is. And remember, there seem to be examples of people being mobilized by obvious lunatic propaganda, right? The pizzeria, ping pong pizza parlor, pedophile, ping pong pizza parlor for pedophiles story. Well, that is food for the crazy people. But there's at least this one guy who apparently was so upset that he picked up his gun, drove to Washington, D.C., and tried to free the little prisoners from this thing. And by the way, in the meantime, right, you want to know about pedophiles, you had Dennis Hastert, you had Roy Moore, you had Mark Foley, right? There's quite a record on the Republican side. And why don't you look into them? Strange stuff. Because with, Hillary has no convictions in this department, at least, that we know of, right? Maybe she deserves it. We don't know. But on the surface, this is crazy stuff. So very damaging and being covered up by the FBI. Now, on the other side, you've got the personnel at the plunge protection team, and they know, just like those FBI guys know, that if you cross Trump, you'll be out on the sidewalk looking for the want ads and trying to find a job. I'm putting it in old-fashioned terms. And here we are as we continue with our program. The Dow is now down about 290, so it's jumping around, right? There's a colossal battle, once again, between the cell programs and the PPT, and we'll see who momentarily prevails. But much of the damage is already done. Remember, when the market goes down 500 points, anybody along the way who has bought stocks using borrowed money, leaving the stocks with the broker for collateral, any of those people will get a margin call, and it says your stocks are so low in price now that they no longer satisfy our collateral requirements. Therefore, you've got to give us cash. That's a margin call. And if you can't provide the cash margin, the broker will sell you out. So even if it goes down and comes up again, you've been sold out on the way down. You are no longer in the market, and that has been done at a loss under the worst possible circumstances. So those are this stuff is not exactly the most modern, but these things still do go on, right? There's people advertising on cable TV that their margin loans, right, their called loans, margin loans, are the lowest interest of any others. So what do we have? Trump is being Hooverized. Trump thought he was going to be Herbert Hoover. Well, of course, at the beginning, Herbert Hoover was the champion of the stock market, right? The inaugural market. Read Galbraith, at least for Atmosphere. And if you want to get down to the bedrock, read me, surviving the cataclysm. But the idea is that in the summer of 1928, the stock market just began to take off. It kept going through 1929, became the inaugural market under Hoover, and then the British raised the bank rate in London, the giant sucking sound of all that money fleeing across the Atlantic. This was deliberate, dear friends, if you're looking for things to investigate. That was deliberate. That was Lord Montague Norman. Later on helped Hitler to stabilize in power. And that is what then caused the New York stock market panic. And that's the way some of this stuff works. And then, because of Herbert Hoover stubbornly refusing to do anything to fight the Depression along the lines of what became the New Deal, he could have started that. But he didn't. He refused to. He said, no, the free market does not permit me to do it. That is the old Grover Cleveland argument, right? Grover Cleveland would say, people would write to Grover Cleveland and say, my wife is starving and I'll be dead soon also. Why don't you do something to help us? And he write back saying, no, I can't do it, or send back word, probably not in writing. I can't do that. That would interfere with the free market. And I'm essentially the free market, free trade Democratic Party of Grover Cleveland, right? And that stayed as the right wing of the Democratic Party, right? We don't like banks, all this other stuff, right? The paranoids. Grover Cleveland was the leader of the paranoids for a while. So this is now the situation that we're in, and Trump is being Hooverized in the same way that Herbert Hoover was Hooverized after the crash of 1929, in 1930, in 1931, and 1932. We hope it doesn't last that long. But Trump is being Hooverized. Welcome to Hooverville will be his next road trip. Back in a minute. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., where the Dow is down about 320 points. And we're now in the last 15 minutes of selling, and we'll see where this ends up. But the damage is done. The psychological damage is done. October is the cruelest month. They sometimes say that the losses have been greater in September, especially since September 2008, but that October has greater volatility and is therefore the cruelest month in the investment calendar. It could very well be. Now, what we are looking at, first of all, let's stress that this situation is thoroughly rooted in a contraction, in a slowdown. And the slowdown, and you can see it partly through direct statistics when you can get those, but it's in particular, it's coming in areas where you can see it through the stock prices in that area. And it therefore means that you've got to look at the automobile industry, and this includes Harley-Davidson, motorcycles. These stocks are beaten down. The parts manufacturers are beaten down. So the entire Midwestern U.S. economy in the auto sector is beaten down, and the stocks show it. Ford stock is down 30% or some odd. So auto, bad shape. Home construction, bad shape. The Federal Reserve here has raised interest rates. The interest rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage is now over 5%. For some, that's unsustainable. Home construction is slowing down. Now, that by itself, those two, auto and home construction, if that slowdown continues, that gives you a recession. But on top of that, we have the chip wreck and the tech wreck. And that is to say, areas of semiconductors, chips, which where the stocks are faring relatively poorly. And, we saw this, everything but Intel has been beaten down in this sector. All of the secondary, sort of non-Intel, if I can say that, producers are hurting, and the stocks show it. So again, they give great attention to Intel because that seems to disprove the situation, but it's not. The chip stocks as a whole are in a bear market. The chip stocks have gone below 20% from their highs. You've also got other sectors, probably the most important, of course, of all, the banks. The banks not doing well, continuous losses even for the most sensitive ones like J.P. Morgan, down, down, down. And then you've got areas that seem to be impossible. Right here it is. It's the pre-Christmas buying season, and we have a crisis in the toy-producing sector. This would be Mattel and Hasbro. So down, down, down they go. A lot of this has to do with the fact that the Trump administration did nothing to save Toys R Us. They could have instructed the Federal Reserve, here, make a loan, keep them going. Don't let Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts, hedge fund, leveraged buyout firm, whatever they are, Raiders, and don't let Bain Capital, private capital asset strippers, don't let them asset strip Toys R Us into complete bankruptcy. And now you've got on top of that Sears. So you have added 150,000 destroyed jobs just through those two alone. The retail apocalypse goes on. Trump never talks about it. Has he ever said it once, that there's a retail apocalypse on his watch? This has destroyed far more jobs than anything in the coal industry. And obviously we know that production and selling are different, right? That production is more fundamental. But there's no reason to simply let this all happen. And when it's being done by these ripoff artists, right? The hedge fund hyenas have stolen Christmas. And we have to turn to Trump and say, hey, Trump, didn't you promise that the war on Christmas would come to an end? The war on Christmas is in the most virulent phase under you, on your watch, because the whole toy industry for kids, little children, you're trampling on that with your policies, your malfeasance and your nonfeasance. So if we go through these different areas, we see that there really is fundamental weakness. Now, let's just talk for a couple of seconds here. 1/2 of all the stocks in the Standard & Poor's 500 are in a bear market. We are told that right now the ratio of puts to calls, that is sort of short selling compared to long buying, this is now 1.5. That is an extreme figure. That is way, way out of the normal bounds. So when puts prevail over calls by 1.5, that's a sign that further decline can be expected. And then, take a look at your Standard & Poor's. Don't take my word for it. Take a look at the Standard & Poor's index. You can find this. Just put in S&P chart, and they'll offer you the different times. Let's take a look at a nice 5-year S&P chart. What you'll see is that it has created a double top. A double top. Look up double top. Go to some Investo encyclopedia or something. And what does a double top mean? A double top means that some kind of an index, the way these guys think, the chartists, the technicians, they think the market wanted to break through a resistance above 2,800 on the S&P. And then it tried again, and it did slightly better, but it's also falling back down now. So what you're left with is this pattern. It looks like a U. In January, February, we got above 2,800 on the S&P. Then we fell back to about, 2,700. Then back up again recently, August, September. And now there was a flat moment, and now it's diving. It's in free fall. That's a double top. And that is one of the most ominous signals in the chartist's handbook. And again, this is not our cup of tea, because we're not usually that interested in short-term behavior of these markets. But right now we are, because of the obvious most important election in the recent history of the United States, up there with 1864, Would there be a country? Could Lincoln finish his work, or would McClellan sell out to the Confederates because of his racism and his resentments and all the rest of it? That was a big question then. And, of course, 1940, would we have President Charles Lindbergh, friend of Hitler, friend of Goering, puppet of the Nazis? Well, we've got something like that going, but now we need to have checks and balances. We've got to have the Democrats in control somewhere that they can use to box in this character, right? The dotard in the White House who wants to have another summit with Putin. Yeah, the first summit went so well. Let's have another summit. Let's make it Paris in time for Armistice Day, November 11th. Well, no. We say no again. Don't let him have summits. He can't have summits. He can't be alone with foreign leaders. The Venetians had this. The Doge could not meet alone with foreign leaders. We should go back to that good old Venetian custom of not letting the Doge negotiate by himself with foreign leaders. So this is the way it looks. Now let's try to tell you here what let's see if we can find it. The question here is the clearest article is in Barron's, and Barron's we'll give you the quote here at the beginning of the next hour. But Barron's tells you that if the S&P goes below about 2585, get ready for the sum of all fears. The sum of all fears from a Hooverized Trump. Back in a minute. To the second hour of A World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from the banks of the Potomac, autumnal with falling leaves and drizzle, at least when we started the program. So now we've had the close in New York, and we have the Dow Jones minus 296. There's a funny effect. Yesterday, it was up 399, and they wanted it to be up 400. So this is the plunge protection team. They wanted to have a 4 handle on that, so they got the 4 handle up to about 400, 401, and they left it at that. Now here it was. When the markets closed, it was down 338 or approximately. And now somehow it's gotten to minus 296. So instead of a 3 handle, it's a 2 handle. These are cosmetic measures by the Plunge Protection Team, also known as the President's Working Group on Financial Markets. Don't tell me it doesn't exist. They even have a little brownstone on the west side, I think, of Lafayette Park, among those other councils and so forth. John Crudele of the New York Post has written all about it repeatedly. It was highly touted after 9/11, right, when the markets reopened. It said, oh, you don't have to worry. The government has got ways to prop up the market. So that's what it is. So now this is Trump's plunge protection team, and you can see minus 296. Well, that's still very, very bad. And let's take a note about the S&P. S&P closes down 4688. We'll call that down 47 points. And let's go back to this very interesting article in Barron's. And by the way, the things that I cite here, the articles that I talk about, you can usually find them on Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. Go there right now and follow me. Yes, follow me. And what you'll get out of that is big effort to try to get the most relevant articles from all kinds of places, including Europe, Canada, so forth. But here we go with Barron's. Barron's says, what's worse, then the Dow's 433-point drop. Why? A double top. As the S&P nears a correction and the Dow tumbles, some analysts are seeing signs of a double top. Well, there's more than signs. You can see it. Go to any S&P 500 chart and you'll see these two, the twin peaks at the end of the graph on the right. So that's the current situation. Now, here's the thing. The article in Barron's essentially says there's a double top, right? You've just heard it. And at a certain point, they quote an analyst. This is Rich Ross of Evercore ISI. And Evercore ISI, the problem posed here is there a bottom in sight? Is there a turning point? Is there a bottom? And this is what is not known. So Rich Ross says, if the S&P goes below 2580 or 2585, then that will be, and here's what he defines it as, a structural double top with false breakout to all-time highs at the end of a 9-year bull market. The second longest, I guess, in U.S. history. So get the idea? S&P below 2585 equals the sum of all fears. And some of the commentators today are saying when you get an all-time high, followed by a correction, minus 10% or more, then another all-time high, and then going down, that's maybe the moment and to flee. And that's sort of the conclusion of Barron. They don't give advice. We don't give advice either. This is not advice to do anything, to buy, to sell, none of that. It's just, if anything, it's urging people to think. That's all. That's all we can do. And, of course, vote. Vote, yes. The answers to the problems of the stock market are not found within the stock market, but they're found in the political process, right? The ouster of Trump, the end of the Trump era is the requirement, right, through the obvious legal means. So this is the sum of all fears, and they conclude, well, if that's where we are, cash is king. Cash is what you want to have in a bear market. Now, in many ways, we have a bear market. As we said, we've got a bear market in semiconductors, chips. We got a bear market in FANG, apparently. At least at one point today, we did at the worst moments, right, when things were down. Maximum down was 539 in the late morning. And as we said, it closed now just a little bit short of minus 300. So you got a FANG bear, you got a chips bear, you got the put and calls looking very, very bad. We've also got this guy, CNBC, lots of NBCs, gave a lot of time today to Mark Yushko of Morgan Creek Capital, and his notion is that stocks are radically overvalued. Stocks are overvalued by, he says, fair value is 40 to 50% below where we are. Fair value is essentially one half of the current price levels, and points to the fact that there is a depression ahead somewhere, not known when, but it's coming. The Federal Reserve, their urge to raise interest rates is to acquire things they could do when the next recession rolls along. Isn't that a pathetic system? Not about growth, but it's about fending off the next recession. Quite correctly, this Yushko, like so many others, right, the intelligent ones say, the tax cuts by Trump have produced a sugar high. The sugar high of Trump's tax cuts is wearing off, has worn off, and it is true that we have 3.5% GDP growth reported today. But that is simply a way station on the way down into the twos. They all assume that GDP will have a two handle, not a three handle. That is the first figure to be read. It will be a two and not a three. For stocks, this is the worst October since 2008. 2008. And again, he goes through the stuff. Housing is down. Lumber prices. Lumber prices are a great leading economic indicator, and they are beaten down. And then some of these characters say, aren't you giving any credit at all to Trump and his wonderful tax cuts? And this guy says, no, what we have is stealth QE, stealth quantitative easing. That is when companies buy back their own stocks. The sugar high is wearing off. We have some similarities to the tech bubble, the dot-com bubble of 2000, right? The curse of the dot-communists. He thinks the yield curve will invert. The Fed waited too long before raising interest rates. This guy thinks that a recession is needed to restore soundness. The last 10 years have been bad for hedge funds. I guess that's certainly true. And he says a lot of the companies you see stocks quoted are zombie companies. So those are interesting analytical points. The main thing is pay a lot of attention and don't swallow Trump's lies. And we'll get back in a minute on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. A perspicacious observer of the historical process notes, in case we should forget, lest we forget, that the day before Halloween, the 30th of October, coming up next week, marks 1 year since the arraignment of Paul Manafort. So the drama of Manafort on the public stage has now gone on for a year. So, as we said before, we're up to 12 packages in different places. We've got Robert De Niro, we've got Cory Booker, we've got Brennan, we've got Clapper. Trump whines. He says, the Republicans were doing so well, and now our momentum has been broken. Well, what broke it is the really mediocre results of these two monstrously overvalued companies, Google and Amazon. And when they reported mediocre results, the obvious question is, you're going to maintain those astronomical nosebleed pass-out levels, beyond Mount Everest and K2? Your stock is way up there on those wretched, mediocre results? No. So that's what then came home to roost this morning, and that damage, a lot of it is still there, right? 3/5 of it is still there. So this has been a disastrous week. And above all, here we go, cable television, the controlled corporate media, because of their participation in the right turn by New York Times, Washington Post, NBC, CNN, all of them turning right, don't have the blue wave. They're all against the blue wave because the blue wave means angry Democrats, right? The American people, in effect, taking over the Congress and saying, we're going to roll back that Trump tax scam. And, of course, these predatory financiers who own these companies don't want that. They want to keep those tax cuts for the rich. So there it is in a nutshell. But now, at a certain point, it becomes impossible to be silent. Two things happened on Wednesday evening. Yes, on Wednesday evening, we had finally Brian Williams at the very end of his program on MSNBC said, and by the way, there's this crash. He doesn't say crash, but the idea is he talked about the crash, what we know as a crash. And here on Thursday, the Washington Post, above the fold on the front page, market slide dents president's message. So the financial swoon threatens to undermine a market rise, which Trump has frequently claimed credit for, and to highlight controversial aspects of Trump's agenda, including tariffs with many companies, 50 recent earnings reports say our earnings are down because of Trump's tariffs and trade war, and the tax cut that the public regards as a gift to the rich and nothing to do with the middle class. Trump is now obviously in a paroxysm of desperate demagogy in all directions, a 10% tax cut that never was on land or sea, indented in a fit of God knows what psychological symptoms. Then the caravan is now the new Genghis Khan. And, of course, it's a complete demagogic fraud. You have to be really stupid to think that the caravan is going to be taking over homes in northern Minnesota, right? You have all kinds of rights, but there's no right to be stupid. There's no right to be stupid in the First Amendment or the Ninth Amendment or anywhere else. We always mention the Ninth Amendment because that's the one with all the potential rights, the unenumerated rights that we have and which are going to be institutionalized and recognized and enacted as time goes on. But for that, of course, we've got to defeat Kavanaugh. By the way, Kavanaugh's friend is in trouble. Oh, this is interesting. Congresswoman Barbara Comstock of Northern Virginia, a reactionary Republican and Trump supporter. The ads now call her Barbara Trumpstock. And the current level for her is she's losing. Here we go. Washington Post poll, Virginia, 10th District. It's now Comstock 43, Wexton, the Democrat, Wexton, attractive woman candidate, 56. So Wexton is ahead of Barbara Comstock, Trumpstock, by 13 points. Comstock is a part of that clique, along with Kavanaugh, along with Coulter, Ingraham, Tucker Carlson. The whole evening lineup on Fox News comes from the Ken Starr clique of 20 years ago. And by the way, you've also got Ginny Thomas, the wife of Clarence Thomas, who is once again actively engaged in reactionary politics. It had been speculated that Roberts, the Chief Justice, had told the two of them, tone it down. You can't do this stuff. You can't be such an open activist. And apparently Ginny is now saying, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want. I'm supporting my reactionary causes to make America great again. And we'll be following all of that. Anyway, there's a big popular mobilization against Barbara Comstock, and we hope that she will soon be able to spend much more time with her family. By the way, since we're now on these polls, let's just mention a couple of things. We'll do this a bit more next week, right? That'll be the last program before the vote. Right now, according to NPR, PBS, Marist, President Trump is underwater by 12 points. 41% approve of Trump, 53% disapprove. Now, of course, if you want to read a propaganda poll, a push poll, the push poll is Rasmussen Reports, completely discredited. There they have Trump with a 3% disapproval. That's Trump. Now, to the point, the congressional generic ballot, 2018 generic congressional vote, NPR, PBS, Marist. Democrats, 50, Republicans, 40, Democrats plus 10. We'll take it. And I think that's now, after having tightened, that's going to open up. It's going to open up as a result of this, the van of this Sayok's van and his artwork. And then, of course, the fact that Mr. and Mrs. America get together on Saturday morning and they look at their 401k and they're going to see where they are and they're going to say, this is not what we wanted. This kind of incompetence is inexcusable. And they're going to turn against Trump now for stock market motive, economic motives, 401k, kitchen table. World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley here on the banks of the Potomac. A lot of carnage today on the street. Well, Trump will pay the price. He hitched his wagon to the Dow, and the Dow is now repaying him in a way that has so often happened to those who worship of strict observance in the temple of the Dow and the S&P. By the way, the entire Russell 2000, small and medium companies, that's in a correction. That's down more than 10%. And you've got that going on also in most of the NASDAQ. I think the entire NASDAQ is also in a correction. So this will be showing up right when they check their 401ks on Saturday morning. So now we've got this Saturday and the coming Saturday for them to go through that and say that this one-party state, the one-party state of the Republicans especially, is absolutely incompetent, and that this is not what they wanted. This is not why they put Trump in the White House, and it's time to start the process of getting him out, and that starts with depriving the Republicans of their dominance of the House and the Senate. Both houses of Congress must now go to the Democrats to stop further damage. We don't want another neo-fascist on the Supreme Court. By the way, you look at the Republican Party and fascism. Take a look. You've got this guy, we just saw him the other evening, this DeSantis of Florida, who hobnobs with neo-Nazis, according to the Democratic candidate Gillum. And let's just remember that Gillum is up. Gillum is leading, I think we saw it here. Gillum is leading by about 4% over DeSantis. And we've got this guy, Corey Stewart here in Virginia, who essentially appears wrapped in a Confederate flag. That's his big issue, is the Confederate statues. Well, you're going to eat that? You're going to live in it? You're going to drive it? You're going to study with it? No, it's just a complete cultural populist fakery. But this is now the direction of the Republican Party. It looks to me like my long-term perspective, the Republican Party will collapse. It will get on the road to extinction. It deserves to. We don't need a Republican Party. We don't need a robust center-right party. Because look where it goes. It goes all the way to Stormtroop Junction with these characters, the good people that Trump saw in the streets of Charlottesville. Right? A lot of fine people there. Well, no. So the Republican Party deserves extinction. It has no moral ability to exist. It is now the party of lies. If you don't believe me, they voted, those Republicans voted up to 70 times, 70 times, to repeal Obamacare, to wipe it out root and branch, and that means to bring back existing conditions with a vengeance, to bring back junk insurance that leaves you in the lurch when you need it most, and to deprive you of the 10 essential medical benefits. If you have opioids problems, if that's not covered, you're out of luck. If you have mental health issues, it's very common, and you got to have that. And if the Republicans get their way, that might not be covered. That'll be just too bad for you, and on and on and on. So we don't need that kind of robust party. In other words, the party of the billionaires. No, we don't need it. A couple of other things from these polls. O'Rourke, Beto O'Rourke had a great week. He is now closing on Cruz. Here we have a UT Texas Tribune poll. Cruz 51, O'Rourke 45. That cuts Cruz's margin down to a slender 6. So it looks like O'Rourke is closing on the most hated man on Capitol Hill. Here's another one. New Jersey 3, MacArthur. Now, maybe you don't remember MacArthur, but you should. In terms of stripping you of your health care, in a sense, an attack, a murderous attack, a killer attack on your life. This was the guy who recycled a bill in the House that gave the Republicans their second chance at destroying Obamacare. Remember, in the late spring, early summer, they tried once. It fell short. The issue seemed to go away. Then MacArthur came in with his bill, and that was the second chance, and that was when we finally had McCain with the thumbs down on the floor of the Senate. So that character is running against the Democrat Kim, and we're for Kim. This is a different Kim, right? This is a Kim of a different political allegiance, obviously, right? Normally Kim around here means North Korea, but this is the Kim that we want. This Kim is the people's choice, and MacArthur now has a 1-point lead, meaning no lead at all, well within the boundaries of this. Looks like Senator Bill Nelson of Florida may hang on. It's Nelson 46, Scott 45. Scott, the candidate of the red tide. The Republicans are relying on the red tide to fend off the blue wave. The problem is that the red tide is desperately unpopular. But the main sentence of moral unfitness to survive is the way the Republicans are lying, and that means Cruz is lying, Governor Scott of Wisconsin lying, this McSally, she's a particularly scurrilous one, lying. Oh, I've always supported covering pre-existing conditions. I'm always in favor of pre-existing conditions. And this is simply a lie. It is not true. Go and look. You can find ads where they boast about how they're all determined to wipe out Obamacare, root and branch. Right? Not one paragraph, not one comma will remain when they're done with it. So I think that's grounds to redouble your efforts. We'll try to say a couple of things about Maryland here in a minute. But let's, before we do, let's say a few words about nationalism. Now, this week, Trump comes out and says, nationalism. Now, in a way, this really has not so much to do with nationalism in traditional sense. What he means is white nationalism. He means he's a racist. It's really a way of saying fascism. That's what he understands under nationalism. And, of course, that's not really what nationalism has meant. But this is now a signal. He's basically saying, I'm a desperate demagogue. I want my shrinking, embittered, paranoid 24%. 24% are Republicans. And even of those, 90% support Trump, 85% support Trump. It's not going to be enough. He doesn't quite get that, right? And we've got all of these statistics coming in from Texas, from Georgia, that the early voting this year has been enormously more successful than in any previous year. And they're all running scared. So when they run scared, they lie more and more. Let's see what we have here. In Georgia, the first 10 days of early voting were about 240,000. Last time, 730,000. Almost 3 times as many voting in those first 10 days. In Texas, it was the first 3 days. It went, again, 3-1. 288,000 to 952,000. So those are simply signs. And in North Carolina, something similar, and the local authorities are trying to do voter suppression to turn it back. So the party of lying and voter suppression does not deserve to exist, should go extinct. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Just a couple of other words about nationalism. If you go into the 19th century, what you're going to find is you have secessionists, you have Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, the party of treason and slavery, and then you have nationalists, and the nationalists are people like, the Federalists turn out to be nationalists, right? That would be Hamilton, that would certainly be Lincoln compared to those Confederates, and others. John Marshall, certainly a nationalist, one of the great founding fathers on the Supreme Court. So this current abuse of the term nationalism is what it is, right? And it's probably a time to give that term a rest. But really, what is meant here is something different from the usual English meaning. In Russian, to be a nationalist is to be a racist. In other words, to be a kind of ethnic racist. Perhaps in English, or more or less in English, what is really meant here is, again, Trump. When Trump says it, he means he's a white nationalist. So there's no debate about that. But what you might mean by nationalism would be chauvinism, right? National chauvinism. That's extreme nationalism to the cutthroat level. Cutthroat nationalism. I've seen that used. Nativism and similar terms. So there are some people who would like to take advantage of the current moment and wipe out the term nationalism. If you've ever seen this cable TV program, Madame Secretary, they had an episode recently where they had Hillary Clinton, Colin Powell, and Madeleine Albright come in there, and they held a kind of a gab fest with Madame Secretary and talked about Secretary of State, supposedly Hillary Clinton, right? And the burden of this was nationalism is really bad. Well, fascism is really bad. I think a lot of this stuff revolves around the reluctance, the unwillingness to say fascist, right? To call something by its real name. And the other thing, of course, is Trump is not a nationalist, because in order to be a nationalist in a positive sense in the United States, you have to be extremely inclusive, because this place is multi-ethnic, it's multinational, and you want to include everybody. So you can't say, I don't like this group and that group, but I'm a nationalist for the U.S. No, that's sabotage. You can't be a secessionist and a nationalist at the same time. Doesn't work. Not in this country. In some places, you could, I suppose. I don't know. That's really hard. What is more plausible is you can be a racist and a nationalist. Certain countries that are very ethnically homogeneous, you might be able to get away with that. But this is not the United States. No, not here. No way. There is no ethnic nationalism possible in the multi-ethnic, multinational U.S. It's only by being inclusive that you can get a possible result. Now, one last thing. Here in Maryland, we want to warn voters against this guy Hogan. Governor Hogan is essentially a stealth candidate. The GOP establishment sees that their governors, right, their candidates for governor in a whole bunch of states, we won't go through the list, we've been talking about them, that those guys are in big trouble. So what they want to do is a bid going on now to take advantage of this carefully fostered illusion that Hogan is a centrist and try to make Maryland into the new Kansas. Remember what Brownback and Kobach and those people did in Kansas to wreck the state, destroy education, and so forth? There's an attempt to make Maryland into the new Kansas, and believe me, you don't want to go down that road. Everything that has been patiently built in Maryland can be destroyed from one term to the next. So the real Republicans, the real face of the Republicans is DeSantis in Florida and Corey Stewart in Virginia. Hogan is the beneficiary of a group of Republican contributors who say, well, if we can get Hogan as governor for a second term, this will be the first time in 50 years of a two-term Republican, then we can do the Drive for Five. The Drive for Five is that if the Republicans can gain 5 seats in the state Senate, they can deprive the Democratic Party of its ability to override the vetoes of Hogan. And instead, we should defeat this Drive for Five. And, of course, the right-wing, rotten corporate media have done Hogan a tremendous favor, right? Because for months they were saying, the popular Governor Hogan, he's so popular. Well, he's not popular. He should be defeated. So, Ben Jealous, perfectly viable candidate. You notice that you have Stacey Abrams in Georgia. You have Gillum in Florida. Gillum, again, being ahead I think, several points on the most recent poll. Here we have Gillum up, up 5 in the recent Gravis poll from this Wednesday. Abrams, Gillum, they get attention. Ben Jealous was the head of the NAACP. And for some reason, the controlled corporate media have not paid attention to him. So right now, early voting is on. Early voting in the District of Columbia, in Virginia, in Maryland. 32 states right now have early voting. So go and vote. The right to vote, a precious right. Use it or lose it. Get out there, get on the scoreboard of world history. Show the world that Trump is not the essence of the United States, that the reactionary, rotten Republican Party is indeed on its way to extinction. Trump is an aberration. He is a freak of the political process, largely created from abroad, largely created by a charming lady we'll talk about more next week, Elena Alexeyevna Khuzyainova. Yes, at work right now, she was, and probably still is, right, unless they've been able to shut her down through other means, operating from St. Petersburg to attack the U.S. political process. And once again, we have that wonderful, if you haven't read the Dexter Filkins article in the New Yorker about this dedicated link between the Trump Organization server and the Alpha Bank server, you should really take a look at that. And we've also, of course, got this very interesting book, Cyber War, by Professor Jameson, which concludes that, yes, the Russian intervention was decisive. It doesn't have to be decisive in terms of the sheer numbers of Facebook and tweets, but the materials, the fact that by dumping these stolen emails, the Democratic National Committee emails and the Podesta emails, this is what shaped the entire political atmosphere of the fall 2016 contest. In other words, the void, the empty heads of the controlled corporate media were filled by the Kremlin, by Moscow, with this toxic stuff that they were able to dig up. And then this is what provided the questions in the debates, right, along with, of course, Hillary Clinton's email server. And by the way, speaking of hypocrisy by these Republicans, remember that stuff about lock her up, lock her up? Well, what was she going to be locked up for? The word from the Republicans was lock up Hillary Clinton because her email server had led to divulging secret information to the Russians or the rest of the world. Well, Trump does that on his own. Trump has betrayed secrets to Lavrov in the Oval Office. He has betrayed materials from the British. But now we've got Trump insisting on his trusty iPhone, and the Russians and the Chinese are listening in. So maybe you MAGA guys out there would say, well, since Trump is discussing secret United States business on his private cell phone, lock him up. Lock him up. That might be starting for your final mobilization now into the coming election. So remember, get active or get radioactive. Those are your choices. Pick #1. We'll see you here next week. And, of course, we invite you to come on over to AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv, Monday through Thursday.